Hey everyone, welcome back to Anvil of Doom Miniatures. My name is Deets and I hope you've all been well. Now I love birds. I do a bit of bird watching in my spare time, so it's always been a little bit of a dream of mine to kind of have a bird themed high elf army. The thought of having one of those flamed phoenixes, a beautiful northern sky cutter, and a great eagle in my army's ranks really gets me going. And lucky enough for me, I grabbed this great eagle on my recent trip to the Warhammer Tokyo cafe, so today I thought I'd kind of kit bash or kind of craft build a great eagle with a hero on it just for you guys. So that's enough chit chat, let's get straight into it. I needed some inspiration for this project, so before even getting the eagle prepped and trying to find the perfect high elf rider, I headed straight to the pretty pictures section of my high elf army book because I could have sworn that I've seen a great eagle in there somewhere. And of course it was hidden out of focus up the back corner of this army shot, but this blurry image gave me enough confidence to know that what I wanted to do could be done. I've collected a fair chunk of high elves over the past few years, so I thought having most of them out in front of me would really help when coming up with an idea of what I wanted this thing to look like. I also thought the Flamespire Phoenix kit would be a great place to start, as it might have some spare parts to use, like a spare high elf rider, but unfortunately there wasn't much there to salvage. As the hunt continued though, and looking through some more boxes, I did find two candidates that I thought would look great on an eagle. This classic Silverhelm champion, and this 4th edition Lord, which was kindly gifted to me by a great friend of the channel, Adrian. Both had these amazing winged helmets, which I thought would fit with the eagle theme really well. So when I was taking my initial look at this great eagle, I kind of assumed that I could just slap a high elf cavalry hero just directly on top of the eagle and it would just kind of slip in place, but the shoulders really aren't made to kind of fit this thing. If I were to glue the hero on, he'd probably be sitting right on its head because it just doesn't fit. So it's back to the drawing board. I'm gonna have to kind of craft something up for this. Earlier when I was looking at the Flamespire Phoenix kit, I remembered seeing a little saddle on a sprue, so I decided that this project would now have to become a total blowout, and to get this thing done I'm going to have to make my own saddle for this eagle. I also decided to go with the High Elf Lord because I thought his pose would look a bit more epic, and then I got to work preparing the eagle and hero with a bit of pinning. A hot tip for when you're pinning metal minis, use your hobby knife first just to give it a pilot hole and then hit it with the drill. It just makes life easier, especially if you need to be exact and don't have that much room for error. To craft this saddle, I'm going to use some trusty old polymer clay. This stuff is my go-to for making odd bits and pieces when I'm scratch building things, and is super easy to use for any level of hobbyist. I rolled some clay out and then tried to build kind of like a rectangular shape beam and went back and forth placing the legs on until it fit perfectly. Once I was happy, I then started cutting off the excess bits of clay and then placed it on the eagle and squashed it down, making sure it molded to the eagle's back. From here I tried to give it a sleek shape by trimming off more clay and then flattening some areas out. To make sure this thing would fit together properly when it was time to build, I poked a long bit of wire through the legs that were molded into position and then through the seat. I'll use this kind of as like a master pin to hold it all together. When I felt like it was good to go, it was time to throw this seat in the oven for about 10 minutes to harden. I want this bit of wire to be pinned in place on the eagle's back, so I put it back through the saddle, mark it with a paint pen, and then place it in position on the eagle's back. I know this looks like I'm going overboard, but after building a few larger minis and scratch building a couple of others over the past few months, I realized that it's better to go hard with the smaller details. It's finally time for the fun part, and it's time to bedazzle this saddle. I feel like this is the real creative part of kit bashing and scratch building minis, because with a few right choices, it'll go from a block of Play-Doh to a block of Play-Doh with some fancy bits glued onto it. I'm shopping around the sprues from a box of High Elf Spearmen and also a pile of Archer sprues I got from my good mate Stu. He's a High Elf simp just like me and can literally find anything online. Now as we all know, the High Elves truly are the fanciest of all the old world races, so I'm going to make this saddle look kind of regal with lots of ornate parts attached to it. I want it to scream Ulthuan when you look at it, so I've used the High Elf North Star, which is from the Spearman shield, and I've glued this sucker right on front of the saddle to give it a kind of V-shaped look to the front. The Archer sprues is where I really hit the jackpot, as there are a few spare banner poles which had these great little eagle heads on the ends, so I thought it would look good to have some sort of handle going across the front of the saddle that could act as a footrest for long journeys or a way to kind of lift the saddle onto the eagle's back. It was a bit low and close to the eagle's head, so I shaved some of the saddle back with my knife just to make sure it was in a better position. With all my gluing from now on, I'll be doing a lot of pinning, and this was super tricky because I didn't have much room for error because I want to keep the green stuffing and gap filling later to a minimum. I added a couple more eagle heads to the side of the saddle, and I couldn't go past adding this little tramp stamp to the very back. Looking at my high elf lord, I quickly realised that his sword wasn't going to be much use while being so high up, so I thought turning the sword into a spear would be much more useful. I had the spare banner pole left over, so I cleaned that up and then got to work removing old mate's sword with my knife. I like to use my knife when cutting off bits like this when I need to be a bit more precise, because it gives me a better cut compared to my snips, and if the blade is sharp enough, it goes straight through the metal with a bit of force. I then clean up each surface to try and make it as flat as possible so there's not going to be some huge gap between the hand and the arm, and then I get to work pinning. I'm a massive fan of this new banner pole I've added because it has plenty of gems and more of that high elf detail. I was originally thinking about using some plain old brass rod, but it might look a bit too bland, and I'm going for that over the top high elf look. I did place the upper body on the saddle while I was gluing the hand to the arm just to make sure it was going to sit correctly and facing the right direction. Now it's time for the part that I was fearing the most, and it's time to whip out the green stuff. I feel like if the saddle is just plonked on top of the eagle, it's going to look like it's just floating there and it'll look a bit weird, so I'm going to give it a couple of straps going down the front of the shoulders of the eagle. I'll try to keep this super simple, and I start out by getting a good chunk of green stuff mixed up. I'm using a little bit of Vaseline on my hands, working surface and the tools because man does this stuff stick. I'm just cutting out 2 strap shapes and then I carefully work them on the eagle's shoulders until they are looking symmetrical. Now you might be thinking, why not use polymer clay like you did before? Well, I don't want to throw my eagle in the oven, and it gets very brittle the thinner you make it. For the clasp in the middle that's going to be joining the 2 straps, I'm going to make a huge gem that you kind of see on all the old High Elves, Wood Elves and Eldar minis, and this took me some time to get right. I don't use green stuff that much, and I probably should use it a bit more just to get used to it. I always have this ticking clock going on in my head when I'm using it saying it's going to harden soon, so hurry up. But after working on this mini, I've lost that fear and I actually really enjoyed using it because the truth is it doesn't harden that quick, and because it's a bit more firmer than other materials, it holds shape really well. All of the kit bashing and pimping out of this saddle is now done, and it's time to build the eagle so we can finally get some paint on this thing. While I'm sitting here editing all this footage, I realize that this video is basically one big pinning tutorial, so I hope you're enjoying watching me drill holes, poke wire into them, and glue things together. But don't worry, we'll get some paint on this guy very soon. Just like before, I'm gluing some pre-cut and measured bits of wire into the legs and the wings, and I'm using a 2-part epoxy resin which you can get from your local Bunnings or hardware store. I'm just coating each surface with this and then pushing it together. I use some super glue here and there just to hold it in place because the packet says it'll dry in 5 minutes, and that's just false advertising. Once the legs were dry, it was time to move on to the wings, and the best way to glue these suckers together is to build a bit of scaffolding around the mini just to hold everything in place. I'm using a jar of toothpicks and a bit of blue tack because it's the perfect height to hold that wing in place. After letting the epoxy set overnight, this big sky chicken was harder than a rock and it was not going to fall apart anytime soon. But I did have some gaps to fill around the wings and the legs, so the green stuff was back out on the table, and I started making some sausages that I wrapped around the wings, flattened them into the gap with my finger, and then grabbed the most underrated hobby tool of all time, the humble toothpick, to give it some texture and to blend it in with the feathers. If you don't have a jar of toothpicks in your collection of hobby tools, what are you doing? These little bits of wood are absolute lifesavers. With the leftover green stuff, I then made a goblin and gave it to my wife. All the kit bashing and scratch building is kind of done now, and it's time to slap some paint on this guy. But before we move on, I just want to do a little bit of announcement that yes, the Anvil of Doom store finally has some new merch. This month we've added a brand new range of stickers, and we've also added one limited edition print, the Great Sword. All of these designs were illustrated by myself, and there's only a limited number, so you're going to have to be quick. Head on over to the Anvil of Doom web store, the link is in the bio. But anyway, let's get back into it. Now today I'm going to quickly breeze through most of the painting as there is a lot to get through and we're running over time with all this kit bashing that went on before. I'll keep it brief and highlight just the importance, but if you want more details on how I paint high elves, check out my Pegasus video I made a few months back as I go into all the details there. My favourite eagle of all time is the Australian wedge-tailed eagle, and I want this guy to share some of its colours with this beautiful bird, so I'm going to do some wet blending all over to give it a nice brown colour transition. I then slapped down some Agrax Earthshade all over the bird just to tie it all together, and this kind of helps with any spots that I missed. There's so much sculpted texture with all the feathers to this eagle that it would be a crime not to dry brush it, so I use some light brown first all over, and then I add some bone white to the brown, and then I just hit parts like the head and the bottom of the legs and the tail to finish. I keep the talons and beak a brownish yellow, and then I highlight up with some bright yellows to make them pop. I even add some small lines to the beak to give it some much needed detail. Adding small lines here and there or little textured dots to areas like skin on your minis will just make it that much more interesting to look at. From here I went hard with some details like the eyes, and then I moved on to the whites, which I'll do the eagle and the elf at the same time. I love the classic white and blue for my high elves, and these two colors can be a bit of a nightmare to get right, especially white, so I'm going to do a method passed down to me by the big man of old hammer painting himself, Ben, or Wizards of Whiskey as you might know him. I'm covering all the areas that I want white with some Corax white, and just an FYI, you can also try use Ulthuan Grey, you'll just get a bit more of a blue tone to it. And then from here, I'm covering everything with a wash of 1 part Fenrisian Grey to 20 parts medium, and then I'm slapping it all over. I then go over with 1 part Rust Grey to 20 parts medium, and I let that pool in all the areas where I want a bit more contrast or darkness to it. After this, I just go over and highlight with some more Corax white, and then I mix in a little bit more plain white with that. This technique has been an absolute lifesaver for me, and it saves me plenty of time, so definitely give it a go if you're over chalky whites. If you've been watching the channel over the past few months, you'll notice that I've kind of changed my direction on my videos I'm producing. I made a lot of painting tutorials in the beginning of the channel, but lately I've been hit with this real creative bug, and I'm really enjoying pushing myself with kit bashing, crafting, and even just talking about minis. Painting minis is fairly fun, but I found that building things from scratch and then painting them is a bit more challenging for me, and feels way more rewarding when it's all wrapped up and sitting on my desk. I've worked on a dwarf kit bash, a chorf kit bash, and now a high elf kit bash, and I would love to know what army you'd like to see me tackle next, so throw a suggestion down in the comments below. I'm thinking a greenskin creation would be pretty fun, or maybe a Skaven creation would be pretty cool too. I have this long list of projects which is always getting longer, and some of them are pretty crazy ideas which you'll all see very soon, but each one will take me some time to create, so make sure if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you do that now so you can stay up to date with all my videos. Also, don't forget to slap that like button, it really helps my channel grow and I'd really appreciate it. As you can see, I've powered through the blues, which took up the bulk of this mini, and it's time for the true metallic metals. And there's always that point in the project where you can see things start to kind of come together. And because I usually leave my metallics last, this is that point for me. I'm really taking my time with these because the last thing I want to do is fix up the blues and whites. As the white has a coat of medium over it, it would be really tricky to fix up. So I went out and bought some brushes with really sharp tips for my metallics recently, just for this reason. Now, if you've recently started a high elf army with the big old world re-release, you'll now be met with the cold reality of painting bucket loads of gems. The first few are always fun, but they can get pretty tiring after a while. For the 10 gems scattered over this fancy fella, I started off with some corn red and covered each gem. Then I glazed on some corn red and black to the top right. From here, I paint some evil suns in a glaze-like consistency, starting at the middle, and I kind of aim that down towards the bottom left. And then it's time for some Wild Rider red to the left half of the gem, and then a skinny line of orange flare to the bottom left. After that's all done, it's time for the finishing touch, a small dot of white to the top right. I wanted the design of the shield to kind of match the eagle bird type of theme, so it's time for a freehand. I took a good look around for some reference images online and in my army book, and there were a lot of really detailed ones out there, but I think I'll keep this doodle fairly simple. I'll keep it blue, and as you can see, I've just sketched on the initial shape of the bird, and then I add highlights to the inside of the shape. I then add a red beak and red talon that will tie into the gems, and then I give it a slight cleanup. If you want a full tutorial with illustrated guides on freehanding, I made a video recently with all the steps starting at a beginner level, which then heads into a more advanced level. Gluing this thing together was really tricky, and unfortunately I couldn't really film it all because I kind of had to build it in sub-assembled stages and kind of stack it and build it throughout the day waiting for the epoxy to dry, so it was a bit of a task. But the best way I found to kind of glue it all together was just kind of build scaffolding around it and kind of build it up from there. But anyway, here it is. Here is one High Elf Lord on a great eagle. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of the video, guys, and if you want to support the channel out even further, don't forget to head on over to get some of that new merch I put up. I'd really appreciate it. Like always, I want to say a massive thank you to my amazing Patreon members. You guys really keep me motivated to keep making these videos, so thank you. If you want to join the Patreon, the link is in the bio, and we look forward to catching up with you in the Discord. Anyway, guys, I'm out of here. I'll see you all next time. Cheers.